Welcome to Avenue Vineyard Community Church online teachings. Our prayer is that you would learn and grow through listening about the teachings on Jesus and the Holy Bible. Please come visit us in the Crystal Kids Youth Center in Edmonton, Alberta. Our address is 8718 118th Avenue Northwest. You can also download our free app from our webpage, www.avenuevineyard.com, to help keep you connected to our church family. Donations, tithes, and offerings can be made through our app and on our webpage. Thank you for listening, and God bless.
So you can see here that I've titled the reflection for this morning, the message for this morning, I'm calling it The Greatest Song. Now there's two arguments that you can build here, that it's really an inspired title. The last few messages I've kind of landed on this greatest theme. A few weeks ago we had the greatest pursuit. And then last week, I think I talked about the greatest affection. You know, how our first love should be Jesus, our first love should be God and seeking his kingdom. And today, we're going with the greatest song to kick off our Advent reflections. So maybe there's something inspired here, or maybe I'm just being lazy and I couldn't come up with a better title, so more of the same. But I don't know. I'll leave that to you guys to decide. But as part of this, I do think the greatest song kind of captures a little bit of what I'm hoping to capture this morning. But to kickstart the reflection, I do want to start by asking you guys a question. And I really do hope that you feel comfortable. You can just shout your answers out loud. If you need a few seconds to think about it, that's all good. Partly, I did throw this on the Facebook page yesterday, but the question is, what inspires you? And maybe it's something specific or particular, but maybe it's like a specific medium, like a way that a message is conveyed or an idea is conveyed or an experience that you find inspirational. So what are some things that inspire you, that you find inspirational? Worship. Okay, yes, worship can be inspirational. Music, yeah. What was that, Michelle? Giving. Giving can be inspirational. God loves the cheerful giver. When you can support somebody in giving, that can be a wonderful thing. Shannon, you said growth. Yeah, you see in progress, that can be inspirational. A great sermon? Uh-oh. No pressure. And inspiration is a good thing. Inspiration is a wonderful thing. I'm sure we've all experienced times where we've been discouraged or depressed or really felt down. You maybe had a hard time getting out of bed in the morning, feeling motivated to do anything. But, sometimes you feel really inspired, and it's a really great feeling. I just sharing that just right now, I was reminded, this inspiration actually kind of got me in trouble, but I remember when Forrest Gump came out, that movie came out, and I went and watched it with some of my buddies, and I was late teens, early 20s, late teens. Anyhow, we went to the late show. The movie finished just before midnight, but Forrest Gump inspired me. Like when he ran across the country, I wasn't a runner at the time at all, but it just inspired me that he did all that running. So I was inspired. We got back to our apartment at around midnight, and I thought, I'm going for a run. And so I did. I was living in Abbotsford. I went for a run. Ran through downtown. I ran for I don't know how long. And when I got back to my apartment, I was so inspired from my run. I thought, man, that was awesome. Forrest Gump inspiration. I was like, I want to see how far I ran. So I didn't bother going up to my apartment to get my wallet or anything. I just jumped in my car and I was going to clock it with my odometer to see how far I'd run. Now, the problem was when I was running, it had been raining outside, so I was like soaking wet, and I was in my running gear and whatnot, and I don't know, I guess I was the only one out driving at about 1 a.m. at that point. And somehow it seemed suspicious to the police. So on my way back to my apartment, I noticed that there's a police car behind me. I was like, oh, okay, well, I haven't done anything wrong. No red lights, no speeding, I'm okay. Driving along, and about a block from my apartment, the lights go on, and sure enough, he's pulling me over. But like almost before I've stopped, there's 4 other police cars that have completely pinned me in, like in front, on the side, whatever. I'm like, oh my gosh. And like 4 policemen start approaching my vehicle, and I'm like rolling down the window, and they're standing a little far back, like they're on guard. And I'm like, okay, guys, like what's going on? And they're like, is this your car, sir? Yeah. What are you doing out at this time of night? And I was like, well, I was clocking a run. What do you mean you were clocking a run? I just finished a run, and I wanted to see how far it was. You just went for a run. Yeah, I just went they couldn't believe that I'd gone for a run. You're soaking wet. They thought I'd stolen my car. When they asked for my ID, guess what? I didn't have any because I'd left my wallet at home. I did have my registration, and I remembered all the details. So, they let me off, but it was a little intense. So inspiration can get you in trouble. But, sometimes we find moments like that. We get inspired by something. You read a great story, and you're inspired. You guys know that probably my favorite story, Lord of the Rings. I find that inspirational. I'm watching the last installment of the Hobbit tonight with my boys. But sometimes it's music. You might have a certain song that the tune, it just stirs something in your heart. For some, it's walking in nature. I love being in the mountains. The majesty and the grandeur of the mountains, I sometimes can't put it into words, but I feel it. Like I feel something in my heart. It's deep. It's inspirational. Sometimes for some people it's art, various forms of art that can do that. So, for many of us, there's just different parts of life where it breathes life into you. It stirs something in you. It stirs hope in you. It's just an awesome thing. And I think as we enter Advent, we are entering this intentional time to reflect on really what I would consider to be the greatest inspirational story, the Christmas story. And again, many of us are familiar with this story, but I hope and pray we can see it in a new way and be inspired by it. This Christmas season is often marked by these themes of hope and peace and joy and love. And they're all amazing themes that can and should inspire us for life with Jesus. And I think in part, because this story reveals to us, this is partly why it's so inspirational, is because when you think about it, Jesus himself was inspired. He was inspired by his love for us to do this whole Christmas story. That's why he came down to earth, because he wanted to be with us. He was inspired to be with us. We sang it in the one song this morning, Emmanuel. Emmanuel, it means God with us. That was God's heart. That was Jesus' inspiration, to be God with us, to be in our midst, to walk the same ground that we walk, to live the same life that we were living, to be with us. That is the theme of the great story of Christmas. And we read it in a couple of our Advent passages. This Isaiah 7, verse 14. The Lord himself will give you the sign. Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Our other passage, let the richness and it's not fully clear. All the details aren't there, but inherent in this passage, there is a hope. Something is coming. There's inspiration. The boots of the warrior and the uniforms, blood-stained by war, will all be burned. Violence and oppression is going to come to an end. They will be fuel for the fire, for a child is born to us. The hope is not this mighty warrior that's coming to put everyone in their place. The hope is a child that is going to be born to us, a son that is given to us, a gift given to us. The government will rest on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His government and its peace will never end. He will rule with fairness and justice from the throne of his ancestor David for all eternity. This is an epic proclamation. Like, this is the grandeur that, in that we see in all the great stories or the movies that inspire us. The passionate commitment of the Lord of Heaven's armies is going to make this happen. The big guy, the ultimate being, is on a mission, and it's a mission that is promised to break in on our lives. And I called this message The Greatest Song because I think that idea conveys a great truth. I think God created each of us to resonate with this great song. This message, I think it speaks to our hearts. I think that even if we don't get all the details, there's something inherent in it that stirs our hearts. Our hearts resonate with its truth. I've used this illustration before, but the A string on a guitar, it will vibrate or resonate. You don't even have to touch it. If you come close to it, if you hum an A tune, that A string will also vibrate because it was created to resonate with that tune. So when we hear this story of Jesus, this promise of healing and redemption, we were created, our hearts were created to resonate with that tune, and they will vibrate. There's something in us that we just catch it. We know that it's real. Each one of us was created to resonate with the tune of God's desire to be with us. C.S. Lewis said this. He said, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." I think we were made for another world. One with God in it. One where we recognize his love for us and his presence with us as a constant. I think this is part of the kingdom of God that Jesus tells us to seek, to pursue. Heaven overlapping earth, which will one day be a complete reality. The Christmas story gives us one of the best examples of this overlapping with heaven and the spiritual realm. I don't know that we always see it because, again, in some ways we have this nice and tidy nativity scene where everything just seems to come together, and Christmas is this time of peace and silent night. But the Christmas story was really pretty intense. I think, it was an intense example of heaven invading earth. There is no other biblical story that has more instances of angel visitations. There are so many angel visits in this story. Like, that's pretty dramatic. There is spiritual warfare. Like Herod feels threatened and he's killing young children. He's pursuing the baby Jesus. Mary and Joseph have to flee to save his life. This story is full of angels and dreams and visions and visitations and warfare and opposition. This story is an epic story of heaven invading earth. And I think that in it, there's something here that awakens in us a desire for something more than just this natural world. There is something about a story, any good story that awakens in us a desire for something more than this natural world. These things that inspire us, they point us to something more. They allow us to suspend our disbelief, even for a little while, so that we can be inspired for the more, to reach for more, to reach for heaven on earth. And so during these Advent reflections, as a way to maybe bridge the gap or help us connect, I do want to reflect on another story that I think can maybe help us better connect with the Christmas story, or maybe just allow us to see it in a little bit of a different way. And the story I kind of want to try and connect with is the magical story of Narnia. And I'm hoping that most of you are familiar with it because these illustrations will obviously make a lot more sense if you're familiar with the story. Yeah? Okay. Well, I'm hoping. It's pretty popular. So this series, if you haven't read it, this series is going to have some spoilers. So consider this your warning. And if you haven't read it, maybe you want to rush out and buy it. This is just part one. So you could probably read the whole thing before next week if you were really intent on it. But The Chronicles of Narnia, hopefully you're familiar with it, but it is a 7-part series that was written by C.S. Lewis. And the CS, for your information, it stands for Clive Staples. But he didn't really like the name Clive. So all his friends called him Jack. And I think there's a little one illustration of the series. But the first book that was written was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It was published in 1950, and then he went on to write the other 6 books in the series, and they weren't all written in chronological order. This series of books, though, has sold over 85 million copies around the world, and it's been published in over 40 different languages. So it's been extremely popular, and the popularity speaks to the fact that within the story, people have been inspired. They've connected with something. It has spoken to them on a deep level. Part of the reason it's so popular. There's something about this story that resonates with people's hearts. Before I begin, I also think it's important to note, because in the church, I don't know that we always recognize this, many Christians think that Lewis intended this to be a biblical allegory, but he didn't. He never meant for Narnia to be a direct biblical allegory. There was never meant to be a one-to-one comparison between Narnia and the Bible. I think that's why it always seemed weird to me. When I watch it, coming from my Christian worldview, I do see all the Christian elements in it, and then it's a little confusing when Santa Claus shows up to give them their presents. It's like, okay, I don't remember where he shows up in the Bible story. But it's, Lewis never meant for it to be a direct one-to-one comparison. He just set out to write a story, a children's story. But as he wrote, and as the ideas formed, a lot of this Christian allegory, unintended, but it was inspired. It just kind of bubbled out. His ideas were really meant to be what-ifs, to get you thinking or wrestling with the truth. And these ideas just developed. They were birthed through the story. So it wasn't intended as allegory, but those truths, they come through. At the beginning of starting to write the series, Lewis actually started to have a lot of weird dreams about lions. And that's partly what inspired the development of one of the main characters. If you're familiar with the story, Aslan was inspired by these dreams that Lewis was having about lions. And the first book that he wrote was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And if you remember, it's about 4 children who find their way through this secret portal in the back of a wardrobe into this magical land of Narnia with centaurs and what's Mr. Timnus? He's not a centaur. What's he? He's a faun? Yeah, he's a faun. And, these mythical beings, and there's, Puddle Glum, though, I don't know. I don't remember what it is. You'll have to read it for yourself. But it's this magical land that includes dwarves and talking animals. And while these children are there, they discover this supernatural world. And besides the talking animals, there's also a great evil. There's the White Witch. There's this powerful lion who's connected to the great emperor over the sea. And the children, they find themselves as the main characters in a story, and the big epicness of the story, it's a story about sacrifice and redemption. It's a story of good versus evil. But I think what we need to consider is, reflecting even on that part of the story, do we, in our daily consciousness, do we have a grid for supernatural? We all understand the natural world. It's the material world around us. You're sitting on a material chair, thank goodness, or else you'd fall on the floor. We understand the material. What you see is what you get. But what about the unseen? Do we have a grid for the unseen or for the more? Lately, we've been reflecting a fair bit on our blind spots, things that we have trouble seeing, and the supernatural is often one of these blind spots. It's actually why we developed the word supernatural to begin with. This term, supernatural, it actually isn't in the Bible. The Bible never uses the term supernatural because that idea didn't exist in the Bible. For people in Bible times, there wasn't a natural world and a supernatural world. In the Bible times, there was just one world, the one that we live in. And for them, God's presence in that world and his activity in it was just taken for granted. It was one and the same. They didn't divide it between natural and supernatural. It was just one. In our modern age, we don't like what we can't explain. So we invented this world. We artificially divided this world into two parts, which I think is kind of sad. We define a natural world that we can sort of explain, and then some people think, yeah, maybe there's a supernatural, this part that we don't explain, but something, no, if we learn enough science, we'll be able to figure that out too. But we've made our defining whatever is our understanding, which I think is pretty arrogant and prideful of human beings to think that we've got the corner on understanding. I think God's a little bit bigger than us. Now, we might not always understand how the natural world works, but we do live in it, and so it's much easier for us to have a concept of it. It's familiar even if we don't understand everything about it. In the last couple years with a couple of my boys in high school, I've loved teasing them about physics. I loved physics in school. It was one of my favorite classes, my favorite sciences. So far, my oldest two boys have not shown any interest in physics, and so that's been my favorite jab. When something about the natural world comes up that they don't quite grasp, I tell them that's because you didn't take physics. If you had taken physics, like you should have, it would explain this question of yours. And then they roll their eyes at me and like, yeah, whatever, Dad, physics sucks. So, the truth is, we live in a world in which heaven is very much present and active. What we call the supernatural existing together with the natural. It's still part of our one world, even though we've kind of divided it. The difference is we have to search for and be open to the supernatural. It's not just what you see is what you get. It is often beyond our understanding. So we need to sometimes search for it and allow it into our lives. We need to recognize our blind spots. I'm going to show you one. This is you might be familiar with this. You might recognize these pictures. They were really popular back in like the 80s and 90s, but they were actually developed in the mid-1800s. It's called a stereogram. And it was developed, it's a two-dimensional way to try to convey an image in 3D. So I will tell you straight up that there is an image hidden in that little picture. When you look at it, you're maybe only seeing this, variously blue-colored rectangle. And I don't know that you'll be able to see it from your chairs, because when I tried to do it on the computer last night, I actually, in order to see the 3D image pop, I had to get my face about this close to the screen and go a little bit cross-eyed. And then I saw it. You can see the Loch Ness Monster is in there, which really threw me off because the explanation said it was supposed to be a tricycle. So I'm trying to see this tricycle, and I couldn't, and then it popped, and I was like, that's Nessie. So if you stare at it long enough, maybe you want to take this home and whatever, somewhere in there is the Loch Ness Monster, and he's really there. But you may not be able to see him from your chair, but just because you can't see him doesn't mean he's not there. He is. Some people are good at seeing the hidden pictures, and some people aren't. But I think this is an example of something that is made up of things that we can easily see. Each of you is capable of seeing this, but sometimes you have to work to discover what's hidden. You might have to stare at that thing for a while. You might have to go a little cross-eyed, get closer, get further apart. You might have to work for it a bit, but it's there, and you can all see it. And I think this world is the same way. The supernatural is there, but it doesn't always just pop out at you. We have to be open to it. And sometimes it takes some intentionality to be able to see it. If we stop and think about it, one of the big differences between the natural and the supernatural is this ingredient of belief. If we believe that it's there, if we're open to it, we're going to have a much easier time seeing it. If we doubt it and we don't believe, That's why Blaise Pascal, who was a really interesting character, I really like this guy because he was a scientist. He was a great mathematician. You can blame him for a lot of your junior high math. He was also a physicist, which is another point in his favor. He was an inventor. He was also, though, a philosopher, and he was a man of great faith. He had some very rich encounters with God. He had some pretty intense visions with God. And he made this observation. He says, in faith, there is enough light for those who want to believe and enough shadows to blind those who don't. So I just think that's a really cool insight. In faith, there is enough light for those who want to believe. If you're open to it, in faith, you can see it. But there's enough shadow there to blind those who aren't open, who doubt, who won't believe. Sometimes we need the eyes of faith to really see the depths of truth in a story, and understanding certain elements of the story can help us connect with this faith. Understanding the players in the story can be one of these elements. In The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the story is written from the perspective of 4 of the main characters. We've got Peter and Susan and Edmund and Lucy. And these are the human characters that when you read the story, we can relate to them. In the story, the children discover that they have a choice. They have a choice whether to believe in the light and the hope and engage themselves in this supernatural story of Narnia, or they have the choice to remain in the dark, unwilling to see. Now, at first in the story, we get to see they're all at different places in that journey. Edmund is really slow to believe. He's actually the second one that gets to Narnia, but he's still kind of a doubter, kind of a hater. He poo-poos the whole idea. All of them kind of doubt at first. The first character to really see it and embrace it and believe in it is Lucy. She's the youngest, and she's arguably the most innocent. She is the first to see. And something interesting, I think, to consider is, if we consider ourselves as children, we didn't start our lives only or mainly tied to the natural world. There's not many 4-year-olds or 5-year-olds that, apply to physics to explain a situation. There's a part of us when we're kids that we can more naturally embrace some of this wonder and awe of things that we can't explain. As children, we embraced imagination and wonder. As children, faith and belief often seem easier. This is true confession time. How many of you, when you were children, actually thought that you might have real superpowers? Yeah, see? There's about 4 of you whose hands went up, and the rest of you are lying. There is something about, I remember, and it would probably be called tinnitus now, but I remember, every once in a while hearing a little ringing sensation when I was a kid, and I was convinced that was my super hearing trying to kick in. I was like, it's coming. And, my x-ray vision's just around the corner, and, you'd have those dreams where you could fly, and you knew they were going to come to pass. I still remember there was this, I don't remember how old I was, maybe 5 or 6, but it was a Sunday after church, and that back in the day in my family, Sunday, we went to church twice a day. So you went in the morning, and then you went again in the evening, and so Mom and Dad enforced an afternoon nap. And they tried to tell us that's just the way life went, trying to convince gullible children, I guess, taking advantage of that belief of a child. Yes, the whole world naps after church on Sunday. Not totally true. Mom and Dad did, but Mom and Dad were napping. I was supposed to be napping, but I wasn't. And I heard this noise, and I was convinced that someone was breaking into our house. Well, my childlike belief and wonder, knowing that I had these latent superpowers, in that moment, knowing that my parents were napping and someone was breaking in, my Fisher-Price carpentry set turned into a powerful weapon to fight evil. And I went to investigate. As kids, we believe in magic. We're open to things that we can't explain. We believe in the tooth fairy. Some, for a while, maybe even Santa Claus. Sometimes maybe even like werewolves or vampires, not zombies because they're gross and everyone knows they're totally fake. But, we're open to things that we can't explain as children. And when you think back to Christmas as a kid, maybe you have memories just of the inspiration of the day. The day seemed magical. You'd lie awake and you were unable to sleep. You couldn't wait till it was time to get up. But as we grow up, sometimes it feels like the magic fades a little bit. Christmas can seem most magical for children. The magic of belief is captured pretty well, I think, in the. It took me a while to get to it because I wasn't convinced I was actually going to like it. I heard many people from church talk about it for years, so I was a late adopter. But the Christmas movie Elf, I actually like Elf, and this will not come as a surprise to any of you that really know me, but yes, it does make me cry. The end makes me cry, because I think it captures really well this theme of belief, of suspending disbelief, being, connecting with inspiration. But at some point, and I think often we don't remember exactly when, we stopped embracing some of the magic of Christmas time. We stopped believing in Santa Claus. We stopped some of the deeper inspiration, got lost in the shuffle of the Christmas rush to buy gifts and get the tree and put up the lights and do all the Christmas things that we're supposed to. And maybe even now, some of us might even experience a bit of cynicism because culturally, it's been so commercialized that it sucks some of the life out of what I think was intended. What happens is that once we gain some worldly wisdom and experience, the experience of the deeper supernatural, it kind of eases out, and we tend to focus on the natural. That's kind of what's left. And this is one truth, I think, that the big story, the Christmas story, invites us to wrestle with. The more deeply we enter into the natural, the more we distance ourselves from the supernatural. We can't lose sight of the both and. C.S. Lewis, in an essay, he explained it this way. He said, the more lucidly we think, the more we are cut off. The more deeply we enter into reality, the less we can think. What he's basically saying is the more you experience of the natural world and you can explain things naturally, the less open we tend to be to the things we can't explain, to things of heaven, to the supernatural. Lewis here was speaking of the power of story to get past some of those natural defenses and communicate deeper truths at a heart level. And I think we maybe need to consider, how can we get past our blind spots to once again see with deeper faith and belief? How do we suspend disbelief in a healthy way? I think we need to recognize and admit that our understanding is not the final authority. We need to be willing to believe. Jesus showed us this in Matthew 18. He says this, starting in verse 2, he says, Jesus called a little one to his side, and this is what he said to them, the gathered crowd, to his adult followers, to the wise and learned that were, listening to Jesus' teaching. Jesus said this, learn this well. Unless you dramatically change your way of thinking and become teachable. Stop thinking you understand it all. It doesn't matter how much physics you've taken. Unless you become teachable and learn about heaven's kingdom realm with the wide-eyed wonder of a child, you will never be able to enter in. But whoever continually humbles himself to become like this gentle child is the greatest one in heaven's kingdom realm. Why a child? Why did Jesus highlight belief of a child? They are humble. They are teachable. They're helpless. By their very nature, they're dependent on parents, on adults to take care of them. They don't presume to think that they can take care of themselves, that they can provide all their needs. They look to others for help and support. They just know that they don't know everything. They don't. The world is new to them. There's wonder and awe. And no matter how old we are, no matter how much of life we've experienced, we don't know it all. We are still dependent on God. We need to stay humble. We need to be teachable. So your homework for this week, to inspire you with childlike belief, your homework is to go watch the movie Elf. And then you can write a 2,000-word essay on childlike belief. I'll give you credit for it, actually. I really legit will. I'll buy you a chocolate bar or something, take you for coffee. But back to Narnia. You know, in one of the other books, The Magician's Nephew, we see this idea is kind of contrasted with this character named Uncle Andrew. Uncle Andrew is this stodgy old adult who thinks that he is wise in his own eyes. Other people kind of think he's an idiot, but in his own eyes, he's a genius. He's this like supposed learned man of science. And Uncle Andrew, he gets to Narnia. He ends up there by accident. But he doesn't experience any of the wonder of that supernatural world because he doesn't believe. What he does experience is fear. He can't hear the animals talking. All he hears are growling and rumblings. He only sees the natural, and then he starts to dwell on how he can exploit it. You know, I wonder what supernatural things we might be missing because we're neglecting it. We're neglecting belief. In Matthew 13, there's a story of Jesus going to his own hometown, and it says that he only performed a few miracles there because they didn't believe. Their lack of belief didn't allow them to see this deeper thing that Jesus was doing. What was happening right in front of them, you know, they missed it. What might be happening right in front of us if we could really see like children? Especially in this Christmas season. You know, let's not miss out on all of God's supernatural wonders and miracles because we're too stubborn or too proud or too sensible or too rational or too hurried to believe. And then in the story, we also find the White Witch. You know, she is the big baddie of the story, and she's evil to the core. She's merciless, she's cruel, she's power hungry. She controls and influences the world through fear and a lust for power. And when you think back on this last year, can you recognize fear in our culture, in our media? Can you recognize examples of a lust for power? You know, I think fear and power have controlled a lot of people in this season. Media, politics, the White Witch couldn't have orchestrated the confusion and the fear division of this last season any better. It's almost like she was in charge. But if we think of the Bible story, this reminds us of another character, the devil himself. And he goes by many names, but in the book of John, he gets called the prince of this world. And I think that's interesting. You know, maybe he's called that because he tries to rule us and control us with the natural, keeping us from seeing God, recognizing God with us, or recognizing his activity in our lives. Sometimes I think it's really good for us to ask, who really is influencing your life? When you see this world, when we look out at this world, when we look out at our experience, are we only seeing the natural? Or are we seeing some of the unseen, the supernatural? You know, guess who's behind what's going on? There is another character in the story, and he is the greatest character of all. And this character, he brings life and light and hope and redemption. And this character, he guides the children through the story. And you've probably guessed already, this is Aslan. Aslan is the lion. And for us, in the way that we read the story, we often like to see him as a type of Jesus. And I think, you know, he kind of develops in that way through the story. It was kind of interesting to note, I didn't realize this, but Aslan is the actual Turkish word for lion. But the character Aslan, he is the creator and the true ruler of this magical land of Narnia. He is powerful. He is majestic. And we know that in real life, lions are strong. Lions are fearless. They can be quite stealthy and at times frightening. It showed up on my social media feed. I don't know if you've seen those videos like Nature is Metal, whatever. But it was this intense scene where this lion just comes charging into a scene and scatters all the other animals. Like it was just this amazing show of power. Lions are powerful. You can check out some of the videos on YouTube. But lions are also protective. And in the story, they make the point of saying, Aslan is not a safe lion. He's a lion. He's powerful. He can be frightening. But he is a good lion. And in the book of Revelation, Jesus is referred to as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He's majestic. He's fearless. He's powerful with a heart to protect those that he loves. We see this protective heart of Jesus throughout the stories of Jesus, hugging the leper, embracing the leper. His heart for the oppressed and the downtrodden, that's his protective lion heart. And there is this invitation to connect with Jesus in this way. But how do we do it? How can we connect with this love of Jesus, this life of Jesus that fearlessly defeated death? Well, in the Narnia stories, if you look at how they connected, they always find this special way to connect with the magic of Narnia from our natural world. In the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's through the wardrobe, which is basically a clothes closet. You climb into the closet and you keep walking back until you find yourself in Narnia. So it's this ordinary object, but something extraordinary happens. But what's interesting is that the pathway through the wardrobe, it's not always open. Sometimes a wardrobe is just a wardrobe. Why? Why do you think it's sometimes magical? And why does it sometimes work? Maybe you could relate with some of your own God experience. I think that this can be a common experience for us in prayer or in worship, or sometimes maybe at Christian conferences. You can engage with one of those activities and you can have a certain encounter with God, and all of a sudden you think you found the magic doorway to his presence. You tell your family or friends, follow me, I found the door. I found the place where God lives. Worship like this and you'll find God. Come to this church and you'll find God. Come to this conference and you'll find God. And you go there again and you do all the same things as before, and nothing. Why? You're confused. God was here last time. Why isn't he here this time? And then whammo, he shows up in another way, an unexpected way. Why? Well, I think it's maybe so we stay attentive, so we can practice being sensitive to his presence. He's the boss, and I think, he likes to surprise us. If we knew exactly how to find him all the time, in our humanness, I think that might too strongly suit our preference for the natural and for the things that we understand. We would, without even realizing it, we'd start to feel like we're in control. God, yeah, I can tell you exactly where to find him. I can tell you exactly how. I do it all the time. If we felt like we always knew where to find him, we just might start thinking or acting like we're in control and to start taking him for granted. I think that not being in charge, being surprised, can be very good for us. It can be the very things that we need to nurture faith and belief in something that is beyond our understanding. Sometimes the back of the wardrobe is just the back of the wardrobe. But God has given us a really good hint where we can look. God does want us to pursue him. He does want us to find him. I think he's given us a really good posture for our hearts to embrace, to connect with faith and belief. In Ephesians 1, verses 9 and 10, it says this, God has now revealed to us his mysterious will regarding Christ, which is to fulfill his own good plan. And this is the plan. At the right time, he will bring everything together under the authority of Christ, everything in heaven and on earth. So in one way, it is completely revealed. In another, it's kind of hidden, so that we will continue to seek him. God has not hidden it away so that no one can see it, but the fact remains that there are a lot of people in this world who aren't seeing it. And it all depends on how we look for it. It all depends on where our hearts are. Are we looking for it with the qualities of a child? Are we looking for it through the lens that is Jesus? You know, this passage tells us that this plan is centered on Jesus and that only through Jesus can we find it. I think sometimes it's kind of funny or maybe just weird, depending on how you look at it, that many in our culture spend so much time trying to debunk the supernatural. God's not real, God doesn't do miracles, God doesn't really love us, whatever. All the things that they say, like, no, forget God. Yet at the same time, they love the supernatural. But they're looking for it in wrong ways. No, we don't believe in God, but fortune tellers, yep, they're totally real. This lady told me exactly how my next week was going to go, but no, God, Or, horoscopes. No. This story of Jesus is just a nice little myth. But in the paper, there's this little 2-line sentence that helps guide me through my week. Or Eastern philosophy or drugs. In some weird way, they deny God, and yet they want to be open to the supernatural, the realm of this very God they deny. The supernatural, it's there. This life with God is there. Heaven breaking into earth, it's here. So how do we tap into it? How do we find it? Well, I think that Jesus gives us some good advice. Matthew 7. This is what he tells us to do. Ask, and the gift is yours. Seek, and you'll discover. This is part of the process. Yeah, ask, and God will show you the way, but then you got to seek it. You need to pursue it. You need to be open to it. It's something that gets discovered, and not just discovered once. It's an ongoing discovery. There's always something new to discover. This heavenly realm is huge. Knock, and the door will be opened. For every persistent one will get what he asks for. Every persistent seeker will discover what he longs for. And everyone who knocks persistently will one day find an open door. It is by seeking, it is by pursuing that we continually get to taste the goodness of this kingdom that Jesus said he was bringing. So in this season, Advent, preparing for Christmas, looking, eyes open in our daily pursuits, the people we encounter, the song that comes on the radio, the thing that your neighbor says. And, last week, Kelly reflected on, Christy posted that article on the Facebook page that had a story about, the story about the white horse and trusting the goodness of God. We don't always know what the white horse means, but that very day, my little trivia calendar, the answer was a white horse. And at the ladies' Bible study, part of what they discussed was a white horse. It all showed up at the same time in a matter of days. You can't explain that with physics. You can't explain that with God. I don't know how he did it, but he did it. And we can approach Christmas with that sense of wonder and awe that God is doing something in the midst of this season. We can look and read and search through the Bible story for meaning and how it can apply to our lives today. And knocking, having that urgency and the importance, to pursue it, to try and get to the other side. What happens when we do these things? Look at what is promised. We receive from asking. We find when we're looking. The door is open to everyone who knocks, everyone. But are we diligent enough in looking for and explaining the supernatural? Heaven interacting with earth. It's easy to try and be more open to seeing God move, but often we give up too early when we don't see an immediate answer. But again, God's heart is Emmanuel. He takes that name. He wants to draw close. He wants us to know this closeness and to experience this closeness. He's not going to give up, and we shouldn't either. We shouldn't be pacified or just content with the natural, with what we can understand. But I do think that sometimes we're afraid to let God reveal himself because we're afraid of what it might mean, of what we might have to change, what we might have to see differently, how we might have to give up control. But here's the thing. God is already at work in our lives right now in ways that we can't even imagine. We're one small part in the great divine tapestry that he is weaving. But here's the thing for each of us to remember. Our small part is still a cherished part of the whole. So this Christmas season, can we open our eyes to heaven active on the earth? Lord, can we see you and your ways at work in the natural? Can we recapture some of what it means to see and believe with the wonder and awe of a child? My invitation for all of us is to listen for the song that moves your heart. Listen for this greatest song. The song that often, I think, is played most loudly during this hope-filled season of Christmas. And still being in the midst, hopefully coming towards the tail end of this COVID season, we need this hope. We need to hear that song. We need to reach for these things of heaven. It may have seemed like a small thing. I don't even think Josh really realized. I'm going to put him on the spot a little bit, but last night at the supper table, Josh prayed for the evening meal. And as part of his prayer, he prayed for healing for a friend of his that was in a car accident, the kid's in an induced coma. And Josh prayed for healing. He didn't just say, Lord, give the doctors wisdom to know which medicine to use to make him better. It was like, no, Lord, there's a part of this realm, your realm, heaven, that is healing. Jesus, I invite that healing to come to my friend. That should be our first response. Doctor's treatment, yeah. But pray for healing. Invite heaven that is here, that is broken in, to be more real in what we see, in how we act, in how we love, in how we serve. That is the invitation to Christmas. So Jesus, as we wrap things up this morning, despite the aches and pains that some of us might be feeling that typically communicates to us age, I pray, Lord, that right now this morning that age would be irrelevant. I pray, Lord, that in each of our hearts you would renew in us childlike faith, childlike belief, childlike hope, childlike wonder and awe. I pray, Jesus, that in this moment and going into our day, that you would catch our attention with little glimpses of things that would inspire us with wonder and awe. I pray that we would be surprised. Lord, little gifts that would be a surprise, that would catch our attention, that would speak to us. Jesus is here. Jesus is here. Your heart is here. You're with me, Lord. I do pray, Jesus, that you would just renew in us this childlike hope, this childlike faith. So, Lord, we just want to wrap things up. We're just going to take a minute of silence. Ask, Lord, that you would just speak to our hearts. And, Lord, maybe there's something about this message, something about this idea of being childlike that we really need to latch onto this morning. Something, Lord, that we really need to connect to. Maybe, Lord, we can recognize something that you've been trying to speak to us this week, or ways that you were trying to get our attention this week. Draw our attention back to that. Lord, I do pray for eyes to see your wonder and your awe.